Okay, so we are now recording. So once again, a fabulous warm welcome to you all to the Irons Down Under event. This is our May event. Our guest today, I'm just switching screens here to do the professional introduction. Our guest today is Sheryl Gottschall, and she has had many paranormal experiences, including a near-death experience. And these experiences have propelled her into the exploration into the paranormal. She works as a holistic therapist, offering hypnotherapy, past life regression, art therapy, Reiki and shamanic healing. Plus, she offers training in Reiki and Shamanism through her wellbeing practice, the BodyLight Centre. She's a public speaker, she's a presenter, and formerly a regular guest on the Spooky Action radio show and past co-host of the Strange Encounters radio show. She's based in Brisbane, and Sheryl is the host of the Afterlife discussion group. So Sheryl, welcome along to Irons Down Under. It's fabulous to have you here. So many things we could talk about. You've had a near-death experience. You're talking about paranormal things. I know that you are into UFO discussion, UFO research. So many things. Where do we start with all of this?
Well, thanks, Kirsty. Thanks for having me here. I guess to start at the beginning, where all good stories start, is that basically I was born with an inquiring mind. And as a child, I used to look at the stars and wonder if there was anyone out there on planet Earth looking back at Earth, wondering the same thing as I was. So my paranormal interests were actually activated around age 15 when I began reading a newsstand magazine containing paranormal subjects. And I became intrigued with stories about aliens and the afterlife. So I was married at 22, which was pretty young, I suppose, these days when you think about it. But a few years later, my husband and I joined an organisation called UFO Research Queensland. And I've been on their committee now for 33 years. And in that time, I've had the privilege of hearing some incredible personal stories of close encounters. But what I didn't expect to hear was that half the witnesses I spoke to also had a near-death experience. It was a real surprise. But at the time, I didn't link that to the UFO events that had taken place in their lives. Now, this dates back to 1988, but that connection in subjects has only really come to the general awareness of the UFO community more openly in recent years. And mostly because researchers desperately wanted to bring some credibility to the UFO subject and appeal to scientific interest. So they tended to omit anything of a paranormal nature from the reports. Now, I've seen this in near-death research field too, where for a long time accounts of distressing NDEs were sidelined by researchers for various reasons. That was my perspective anyway. And in fact, only 10 years ago, I attended a Brisbane Theosophical Society meeting where the president of the Australians Irons group at that time, I didn't even know it existed, but they were there speaking about NDEs. And when it came to the question time, I was really flabbergasted when someone raised the issue of distressing NDEs and that she had never heard of those type of experiences. But I'm glad to say that's finally changing, and Irons seems to be expanding its umbrella these days, which is fantastic. But returning to the early 1990s, by this time I'd been exploring the afterlife question in earnest and reading everything I could. I became a member of Irons and sent away to Irons for recordings of their conferences, etc. They used to come back on the old audio tapes in those days. Then circumstances prevailed and I somehow ended up hosting Dr. Ken Ring in Brisbane in 1995 and he was one of the co-founders of Irons, and he was here on a tour for his book Mindsight, Near-Death and Out-of-Body Experiences in the Blind. Then about 1996, I found my way to the Relaxation Centre in Brisbane where I met a woman by the name of Pat Venn. And Pat was facilitating a monthly night on NDEs. And from memory, Pat was clairvoyant and volunteered at a centre for the dying. And she eventually retired, and for a while Brisbane's near-death experience interested community, if I could say it that way, they no longer had that space to come together. And that really bothered me, and it rattled around in my head for years, because I just felt it was, it was something that was lacking here. But at the time, circumstances didn't allow me to create another space until 2012, when I launched our monthly Afterlife discussions group here in Brisbane. And I didn't want to call it IANS Brisbane at the time, because I wanted the group to be free to go far beyond just NDEs. And at that time, I wasn't seeing any signs of the IANS umbrella expanding to cover the broader range of experiences around death and the afterlife. Things like reincarnation, pre-birth memories, mediumship, hauntings, past lives, astral travel, consciousness, all those topics. So I called it Afterlife Discussions, and our group is listed on the main IANS website as a friend of IANS. And we've been meeting monthly since 2012. Well, it should be there if I pay my membership, which is true. So it's been a 40-year plus journey investigating the question of an afterlife and various other topics. And that's how I came to be here, today, to be talking to you about this, this subject. So I've got a I've got a presentation I'd like to share with people. So I'm just going to bring that up now. Where are we? Okie dokie. It will go to full screen. Okay, can you just let me know if you can't see that, but I'm guessing.
Yeah,
Kirsty,
that's fine,
again.
Sheryl, we can see
Great.
that. Yeah.
Terrific. Okay. So so talking about death, the journey to elsewhere, and looks like I've got to use this. All right. And in my opinion, there's been a conspiracy of silence around death and, in the Western world for a very long time. It's been, it's something that we've avoided for various reasons, with modern medicine coming in, and then people moving from dying at home to going into hospitals to die. I think about 80% of Australians, last I read, die in hospitals, which isn't always the greatest place to die, but it's the way it has become in our society. So, so I think it's really important that we sort of raise this discussion again around death. And I'm glad that you're doing a death cafe, Kirsty. That's really helpful to get people to expand their understanding of what's going on if they can. So, because we have to undergo a vast preparation for change to disrobe our earthly state, basically. And I think that those of us in the Western world don't fully appreciate that process of death. And if we had been living in an Indigenous society, we would know more about that, but I'll get onto that in a minute. So what happens is we have this loosening of consciousness as we approach death through the dying experience, so that we separate from our physical body. But like I said, if we'd been in an Indigenous society, we would have grown up as children. We would have been seeing, women giving birth. Well, maybe they would have had their private areas for that. But, even some of the younger women would have been able to see women giving birth. Then in a tribal situation, you see people going through the various developmental stages of their life, and they get married or form a partnership, and they have children, and then they age, and then they die. And if we were living in that tribal situation, we would have a much different idea about living and dying than what we have. And because there are a whole lot of processes that happen before, during, and after. And particularly after, there's a lot of information in the Western world that we are lacking. And from my years of investigating the death and dying, is that there is a history of I guess some people might say mythologies, but I'd say understandings that after we physically die, there's a process that we go through too. And we can have beings like death walkers who will come and meet us and ensure that we get to where we have to go after we die as well. And there's actually been some remote viewing done on that. Some years ago at our UFO meeting, we had a gentleman come, and he had been asked to come and talk about remote viewing alien life on Mars. But as an aside, he told us this story of, he was doing this through the, I think it was the Far Side Institute. And apparently he was very good at remote viewing, but they had been asked to remote view God. Well, they got nothing. But then they were asked to remote view the afterlife. And what happened was they discovered that there were these beings that were would accompany humans to where they needed to go after they died. And he referred to them as the midwayers. Now, there's a book called the Book of Urantia. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it, but in there, it's a channeled book, and it was channeled in about the 40s or 50s, I think it was. It's a huge, huge book, and there's a lot of information in there about planet Earth and how life came to be and life in the universe, etc. But in there, it mentions the role of midwayers in regard to their dealings with humans and how they take them to other places after we die. So that's just one small piece of those types of stories that exist in our history. And I'll just go on to the next slide here. So it becomes under the realm of the psychopomps, the afterlife helpers who take us to where we need to go, who protect us on the way, on the road of the dead, it's referred to sometimes, because it's not all, apparently, it's not all, roses after we die as well. So there are certain things that we need the help of these beings to get us to where we need to go and to protect us while they do that. So what I want to talk about is toward death experiences, and then experiences, paranormal events around death, and then after death. So instead of talking about the road to death, I guess I just like this term towards death experiences because some of you might have heard of Dr. Peter Fenwick, and Peter Fenwick wrote this book, The Art of Dying, with his wife. I think it's his wife or his daughter, I'm not quite sure now. I think it was his wife. But he found that after studying people who were approaching death, he found a whole lot of things that we weren't really aware of. And one of them was that there are signs of people going to die up to about 2 years before they actually die. So to me, that indicates that there are these markers that, I guess, going back to if we were living in that Indigenous situation, we would see those things happen. We would see those things arise, and we would go, I'll mentally mark that, and I'll watch that person. And I have noticed it with my mother too, who's now in aged care. But when she first went in there, she was starting to dream about meeting her parents. And apparently that is one of the markers that we can start dreaming or actually have communication with those who have died. And it's just something to be aware of. So Dr. Fenwick found that as people are approaching death, their language can change. So they can start talking about going on a journey, or when I go XYZ, or someone's coming to pick me up, and we'll be going on a bus soon, and they'll be referring to people who've already died. They might say, oh, my aunt so-and-so came to visit me, they'll be back tomorrow to collect me. And these all occur in clear consciousness, but also in, they might say these things out of the blue, and you'll think, what are you talking about? And then they'll just go on to another conversation. So I think that's really interesting. It's like our unconscious actually is starting to come to the surface and communicate these things to those around us as well as ourselves. Very interesting. Another thing that Dr. Fenwick found was that there is small room for negotiations around the timing of death. So we've all heard the stories of, people who are on their deathbeds and they won't die, or some of them won't die until, or it seems like it, until their relative who's come from overseas or come from interstate actually arrives there and then says their goodbyes, and then that person actually, and then the dying actually do die. And he found that in many cases, there does seem to be some sort of room for us to negotiate the timing of our death in regard to what may be, what could you say, that predestined, let's say it like that. So, and we, where people are fully expected to die right then and there, but they won't. They'll make this recovery, and then the relative will walk in, the child, the brother, the whoever, and they'll say goodbye. It's like, it's be very sad and all that, but they will say their goodbyes, and then the person will actually die. And I find that really interesting too. Some of the other things that can happen, we can have premonitions of death, of our own death. And, whoops, let's move this around. So, and they can occur up to 2 years prior as well. And Abraham Lincoln, he had a premonition of his own death, which came true. I remember I was reading that he had the premonition, he told his wife, and then she could confirm that he knew about his own death when it was coming. Same thing with Mark Twain. He had premonition of his brother's death. And we can also have animals who appear as harbingers of death too. And some of you might have heard stories of, I don't know where that red line is coming up on here, but some of you may have heard stories of animals that will appear just prior to someone dying or at the time that they will die. And things like a flock of crows, or the rooster crowing, or things like that, or a bird might appear on the windowsill at the time of the passing of someone. All those things, they play a role, and no wonder that, in shamanic cultures, they talk about animals as messengers from spirit. So I think that's really, really fascinating too. So they can also act as psychopomps. So the animals, after people die, can actually, or is thought in some cultures anyway, that they will be the death walkers for the recently deceased to protect them and along the road of the dead, to make sure that their soul gets to where it needs to go. Now, this book was written by Bonnie McKenney. I nearly couldn't pronounce her name. And it's all about the premonitions and signs by people who were lost at 9/11. And I've just got to just get some notes here about that. Where did I put it? Somewhere here. Or maybe I didn't save it. I'm not sure. But oh, here we are. Yes. So it's she gathered stories. She lost her own husband in 9/11, and she gathered stories of visitations and signs from individuals' lost loved ones. And many of those people could tell stories of premonitions where their beloveds had given signals and signs that they knew that they were going to die, such as in the case of Bonnie's husband. Her husband was named Eamon, and he'd been speaking of his coming death in the summer of 2001. And 2 days before the 9/11 attack, he told Bonnie, his wife, that he was now ready. And these are the sort of strange things that come out of people's mouths in that book, where it was like they knew they were going to die, and they started to behave a bit differently. They would say things they wouldn't ordinarily say. It was like somehow we receive messages sometimes, of course, not when accidents or anything like that, but that signs that we are going to go. Now, in my own family, my grandfather, who had been through World War II, my grandparents lost a son when the son was 4 years old. He died in a car accident. And so my grandfather in particular was not a terribly, he was a very private person. He never liked to talk about the war. He kept things to himself a lot, didn't say much at all. He certainly never really expressed any sort of sentiment towards family members, except for when I was a little kid, he used to call me love, and that was about it. But he never said, oh, you know, he never came and gave me a hug or anything like that. But just before he died, I had the whole family at my home for a Christmas lunch. And when my grandparents were leaving, he came over to me and he hugged me and he said, "Thank you, love. It's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed my day here today with you." And which is so out of character for my grandfather. And then by New Year's Eve, he was dead. He'd had a major heart attack, and he was taken to hospital, kept on life support for a couple of days. And then my grandmother said, "No, we'll let him go." So it was as if he was somehow knew that he was going to die. And it impressed me greatly, so much so that I've just never forgotten it, because it was just so out of character for him. Some of the strange things that can happen before death. This refers, I'm sure you've heard of the Mothman incident. This was a Silver Bridge collapse at a place called Point Pleasant in USA in 1967, where people died when they were on the bridge when it collapsed. But this mysterious creature actually appeared before that, and it was going back to like the birds, except this was a strange creature. Depicted like this, like the Mothman. It was a creature that had no neck, and it was winged and had red glowing eyes. And it appeared beforehand as if to warn people about the upcoming disaster, basically. And that's supposed to be an image of the creature that was seen on the bridge before it collapsed. There are other incidents like that. There was the Freiburg Shrieker in Germany in 1978. And that was where the workers in the mine, they approached the entrance to begin their day of work. And as they got closer, they noticed a man appearing to be wrapped in a dark trench coat, and he was standing in front of the entrance. And unsure as to why the man was standing there, a few of the workers approached to investigate. But when they got a few feet away from the man, in what they thought was a trench coat, it actually flung open and formed a pair of huge outstretched wings attached to this dark figure. And the miners who had approached stood in shock, and after a moment the dark figure let out a series of piercing shrieks, which were later described by eyewitnesses as sounding like 50 men screaming and the sound of trains' emergency brakes. So the miners fled, and the creature fled, and it was called the Freiburg Shrieker. It was a very strange thing. So, coming from that paranormal background, I find these things fascinating, but it is interesting how this sort of thing happens before, before some sort of disaster, because there was something that happened with the mine later on. The same thing with Chernobyl, with that disaster site too. A strange winged creature was seen there too, and you can look that up on the internet. Some of the phenomena that can happen at the time of death are very interesting as well. So people will report being in a room, doing the deathbed vigil, and then a haze-like change in the room occurs. And some people have described it as like a mirage on the road on a hot day, you know, where it looks like it's water. They can get that heat haze as well. So, and I've spoken to a couple of people who've seen that, and I watched someone on YouTube talking about that too, and they said it was just the air in the space in the room, not the air, the space in the room changed, and it just went all hazy. And I seem to remember in what's his name? I can't think of his name. The gentleman who wrote the book, who coined the phrase near-death experience. Someone help me out here. I can't even think of
Raymond Moody.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kirsty. Had a mental blank there.
It's all right.
And he talks about an experience when one of his parents was dying, and the same thing happened in the room as well. Smoke can appear, or sparks can appear. There can be a radiant light that lights up the room as well, or sometimes people feel a gentle breeze. Digital clocks can begin to flash, or if some music is playing, it will stop, so there can be mechanical malfunctions. Animals, like I was saying before, there can be odd animal behavior, and dogs can howl, and the family pet, if they're dying at home, they can howl. Or if someone's dying in hospital, the family dog at home can howl as well. And I think you'll find, I won't even try and quote who it was now, but there is a doctor who looks into the paranormal connections with this type of behavior, and he's written about that as well. So there's a lot of strange things that can happen at the point of death. And going back to Raymond Moody with the shared death experiences, these are really interesting to me, because people who are doing the bedside vigil, they could be drawn into the dying experience with the person who is dying. And he talked about this shared death experience where the space in the room went hazy, and where he and I think his mother and sister were there. I can't quite remember now, but he's written in his book about shared death experiences, glimpses of eternity, or glimpses of reality, I think his book is called. And they are drawn into the death experience with their loved one as well. And that's fascinating. It's fascinating how it can change when someone's dying. Unusual things can happen around them, and I've heard a few stories of those as well. Now, this is a depiction of Jesus when he was on the cross. And at the time when he died, and I'm not going to get into the question of did he exist or didn't he, but this is just what was supposedly reported at the time of his death, that there were disturbances in nature, and there were 3 hours of darkness. There was an earthquake, rocks split, the temple veil split in the area. Tombs were opened, saints appeared to many, and Jesus appeared to many. And this is all around the time of his death. And in the background of this depiction up the top there, on the top left and top right, which I've blown up and put down the bottom, you can see these beings in craft, or what looked like craft to me, but they could be in clouds, they could be, I don't know exactly what they're supposed to depict, but they were there they were painted into the artwork at the time of his crucifixion. Just things to think about. There's stories of Banshee, these strange female who would shriek at the time of someone's passing, or just appear just before they passed. And what else was there about her? Oh yes, so the Banshee comes from an Irish legend, and she's laments, I guess you could say, and in the singing form, and she can be described as a fairy woman or the Banshee, and she would sing when a family member died or was about to die. even if the person had died far away and news of their death had not come yet. And in those cases, her wailing would be the first warning the household had of the impending death of that loved one. Now, beings like that have been in the mythology of various cultures, and I'll say mythology, and you do have to wonder if it was just one culture where something less appeared, you'd think, well, maybe it's the mythology of that particular culture. But when these things flow through many cultures, you have to stop and think, well, maybe there's something in this that these cultures are tying up in their own stories in their own way, and giving them context for people to which they adopt into their spiritual understanding. There are also hooded beings and shadow people who can appear at the time of death. I've heard many stories of these types of beings. They've been seen during near-death experiences, and I've heard a story of someone in one of the hospitals here in Brisbane. She was working there at the time. I don't think she was a nurse. I think she was in administration from memory. And she saw this being walking down the hallway with a cloak after the nursing staff and the doctor had been called in to respond to someone who was, the alarms were going off and they were having a heart attack or some sort of thing like that. But while they were all in there, she looked down the hallway and she saw this being wearing this cloak walking by. Thought it was very strange. And those hooded beings, were depicted in Roman mythology too, and they're called the geni cuculati. And I remember when I spoke about these at the my own afterlife group, that I thought that geni cuculati sounded like some sort of biscuit that you could have with a coffee. But they're very interesting. They're depicted as wearing these cloaks. Sometimes they go right down to the ground, and you don't see their feet. And other times they're in these shorter cloaks. For some reason, it won't go for my thing. Oh, there we go. Here's another depiction of them. I find them very interesting. So in the paranormal community, I guess you'd say, we talk about shadow beings, and these can appear at the time of death. They can be seen around places that are haunted, for example, or supposedly haunted, but certainly where the dead are buried. And they can be benign, they can be negative. Sometimes they're reported as being red-eyed, glowing eyes, wearing hoods. And there's one in particular referred to as the Hat Man, which is really well known, which is seen like this, with the glowing eyes and a hat in a long, dark robe, and you don't see feet touching the ground, which is really, really strange. But you can see that in, it's death and dying is so much more than just studying what happens up to the point of death, but it's also about coming to know what to expect after death too. And in the Islamic culture, they refer to these beings called the jinn, who observe humanity, and they can be hostile or they can be beneficial to human beings too. But they are non-physical but intelligent beings who also appear around the time of death, as well as many other types of experiences. So getting on to the actual dying experience, people have been known to be in their deathbeds, and they will hold their arms out just like this slide, and they seem to be, sometimes if they can talk, they will talk as if they're seeing their deceased loved ones, maybe their parents or a husband or a wife, brother or sister, and they'll put their arms out as if they've come to take them away. And that's actually quite common. They can have their deathbed visions, and where they can report seeing both realities. They can see themselves in in their hospital bed, but also another reality around them, or see themselves in that reality. And in fact, it's probably a good time for me to tell you about my own near-death experience regarding this, because at the time I'd been very ill, and I'd been through all the traditional and non-traditional healing processes, shall we say. And in a desperate attempt, I'd gone to see a hands-on healer. And that day I was brought home by a friend, and I lay down on the couch, and they left because my husband would be home any minute anyway. So I was laying there on the couch, and I just was not feeling well at all. And this, I guess you call it a swirling vortex in the shape of an ice cream cone, which was narrow at one end and wide at the other end, came out of the lounge room wall and opened up like that, so that the swirling was horizontal. And it was very malleable. It was sort of, you know, went back into the wall. And my vision changed. I could, just before this happened, I was thinking about this the other day, I actually noticed orange, the colours orange in the house at the time, which at that particular time, I think there were some orange chairs and something else with orange. And I don't really know why I noticed that, but they became quite vivid in my vision. And I suddenly felt this pull into this vortex, and it was like a very strong gravitational force. And I split off from my body, and my non-physical self was there clinging onto the back of the lounge chair. But I was seeing this swirling vortex, which was dragging me wanting to drag me into it. The force was so powerful, and I wasn't going. I definitely wasn't going to go, because I had this very strange experience of the energy that was pulling me in was malevolent. And I can't explain that. I don't know why. Nothing was happening, but it was a very strong sense of that malevolence. And then that went on for quite a while, but I was seeing two realities at the same time. I was seeing my living area, and I was seeing this thing with what some people might call third eye vision. I don't really know, but it was some sort of other faculty that kicked in. And I saw this ticker tape go through my mind, as like, you know, when they used to pull out the long threads when they're looking at the telegraph coming in. And on it was my daughter's name. And as soon as I saw that, it just all stopped. It just all switched off. And that was the end of that. But it was a very frightening experience, which really drove my interest into looking at distressing near-death experiences. But it's an example of being able to see two realities at the same time. Other people report seeing angels or deceased relatives, spirit beings, all those types of things, which I'm sure you're all quite familiar with. And I was going to talk about the shared death experience, which was the one with Raymond Moody. But there was another one I was reading recently where someone was sitting with a friend who was dying. And at the time they were leaving their body, so did the person who was doing the bedside vigil. They left their body, and they both floated up above their physical bodies. And the dying friend looked at the living friend in the out-of-body state and smiled as if to say, well, here we are. It's really nice to see each other, and but I'll be going soon. And the next thing he knows, the friend has died and he's back in his body. So that's another example of shared death experiences. Mm. So after-death experiences too. And some of you may have read the book by Dr. Sheryl Sutherland, which was about the beloved visitors, about signs and visitations from children who had died visiting their parents. But there was a survey done in 1971, and this was about widowhood. So people who had lost their partners, and they were referred to as hallucinations at the time, but they were seeing their deceased partners. And the person who did it was Dewey Reese, and he found that these hallucinations of the deceased, they lasted many years, but most were common during the first 10 years of widowhood. And it had nothing to do with them being lonely or suddenly being, living in isolation. And they weren't depressed or anything like that. But they found that males and females had a slightly different response to a sense of presence, or seeing the deceased, hearing the deceased, speaking to them, or being touched by them. But they certainly had a response. Now, I have a friend whose ex-husband died years ago, but for 8 years, she and her daughter saw her ex-husband and the girl's father, on and off for 8 years. And this is a good friend of mine, and I believe everything that she tells me in regard to that. And I've asked her quite a lot of questions, and he would just appear out of the blue. And my friend believed that he was there to comfort their daughter, because she did not handle his death well at all. He died in a car accident, and completely unexpected, shocking to her. So much so that my friend became her carer, because it created sort of mental health problems for her after that. So, but that was 8 years, and initially he would appear like weekly, and then monthly, and then after that, months at a time. But the last time they saw him was 8 years after he died. This is a really interesting story, which is Lily Leonardi. She was a former police officer and FBI agent, and she was at the crash site of Flight 93 at 9/11. So she's a person who, dots her I's and crosses her T and gets all the ducks in a row. She wasn't prone, holding those positions, you can't be prone to exaggeration or anything like that, and being quite objective about incidents that occur. But this was at Shanksville in Pennsylvania, where the plane came down. I'm not going to get into the conspiracy theories about 9/11, but supposedly where the plane came down. And when she arrived at the scene, there were people on site there, but she saw a flicker of light, and then she saw angels appear, which is quite spectacular, or what she called angels, a group of them. And one in particular was a blue man who identified himself as Michael. And she assumed after that, because she didn't know anything about this, but she assumed after that he was Archangel Michael. And she had then had communication with him on and off after that experience. But that particular incident changed her life. And she went on to write a book about her experience of that and the communications that she had with this being who identified as Michael. So we have these stories of people communicating, the dead communicating with the living. And 2/3 of those accounts of death contact occur during the sleep, going to sleep and waking up phase. Now, some people say, it's because of the hypnagogic and hypnopompic phases that our minds go through when we're going towards sleep, and then when we're waking up. But I think it could be something else. I think that during those times that our brain is producing brain waves that are different to when we're fully conscious and fully asleep. And perhaps it's those times where the deceased can reach out and make contact with the living. And Rosemary Guiley wrote a book before she died called Dream Contact, I think it was, or something like that. And she had collected all these stories where people have had contact with the deceased when they were dreaming, and they'd given them all sorts of information. And there was actually one case where my colleague and I were out interviewing a young woman on the north side of Brisbane, where she had seen some lights come down in a block of land that was, hadn't been developed. It was still scrubland, but it was across the road from where she was, the residential area that had been developed where she was living. Anyway, so he was in the scrubland, and he was looking for any signs of, you know, some sort of hoax devices that might have come down, because we were there looking for, you know, she reported a UFO. So we were out there checking it out. And while he was doing that, I was talking to her, and she was telling me about these other things that were going on in her life. And one of them was that her father, who had died, one day appeared to her fully in the flesh in the living room. He was sitting on the chair, and she walked in and she saw him, and she got a heck of a fright. She said it's just scared the heck out of her. And then she basically said, "What are you doing here? You're dead," that sort of thing. And she told him then and there that he could no longer contact her in that sort of form, because it just scared her too much, and because he was just so apparently alive and in the flesh. And she said, "If you want to communicate with me, do it through my dreams." So after that, she'd been having dream contact regularly with her father, with her deceased father. Fascinating stories. But this is my favorite, I guess, and I'm hoping, I've got a video I'd like to play for you after this, and then we can go to Q&A, but is the Peak and Darien experiences. And these are experiences where we can have interactions with people who are dead, but we don't know they're dead at the time, okay? And there's a great case, oh, whoops, go back. There's a great case that Barry and I filmed when we were at an afterlife conference down in Sydney about 5 or 6 years ago now. And Nikki Myers from the paranormal team there told this story. And I'll just see if, I'm wondering if it'll play. Let's see. Oh, it was good.
Hi, my name is Nikki Myers. I'm co-founder of Whisper, West Sydney Paranormal Research. Last night we had a Whisper event at the Hero of Waterloo, a little hotel down in the Rocks. During the course of the evening we had a dinner break, and upstairs is where we had the function in a tiny little room. It was only about 35 of us, so it was really quite intimate and lovely. And a gentleman walked into the room. He kind of was a little bit out of place, which is why we noticed him, yeah? To me, he looked lighter, and I don't know if that psychologically, because we were all dressed in black, it was dark, but I noticed it was the owner of the facility. I'd met him a few times previously, a few years ago, and I commented to one of my teammates, oh, look, you know, it's the owner. He's come all the way up here to just check out how the event's going. You know, he's really supportive about the paranormal, so it's really cool that he kind of made the effort to come up all these steps to just see how it was going. Funnily enough, he actually said to my girlfriend's father, you know, how's it going? You enjoying the evening? He shook his hand and disappeared, right? That was the end of that. The end of the night, we were outside at the cars just packing up, and everyone was ready to go. And I said to my partner and founder, Craig, I said, wasn't that great that the owner came up, you know, to have a look at how the event was going? And Craig goes, she? I said, no, he. It was Ivan. And Craig just said, no, he died a couple of years ago. I said, no, right? No way. Another one of our team members, Jared, he'd also seen him and said, no, mate, he walked in. He was definitely there. We saw him. The historian had actually had a photograph of what he looked like. So she pulled out the photo, and oh my God, he had the same outfit on that he had in the photo that we'd seen, you know, a little while beforehand. So I rang the girl that I was talking to, whose father, shaking the hand. And I'd said to Chloe, do you want to have a look on the website? I told her the story. I said, when I get off the phone, have a look on the website, show the photo to your dad, see if it's the same man that he saw. 2 seconds later, she rang me back and she said, "Oh my goodness, Nick, yep, it's Ivan. You know, that was the man he spoke to." And while that was going on, Craig had gone to check with the guys closing up at the hotel, you know, how long Ivan had been passed away for. And one of the workers turned around and said, "Mate, that's funny you should ask that. It was 2 years tonight." Now, my girlfriend's father, he freaked out, had to pull over. He was driving in a total state of shock. We're still trying to kind of make sense of it. I'm still getting goosebumps now, even talking about it. It was just totally surreal. And it just goes to show that it doesn't have to be really loud and noisy for it to be a paranormal experience. It's just these really subtle, beautiful energies, and we could have missed it. We just could have missed it if I hadn't have just made that comment to Craig. We would have missed the whole thing and not realised that we'd actually, had such an experience. And for Chloe's dad, who was very skeptical, he's now got his own really cool ghost story, and has certainly opened his eyes to what his daughter does now in after hours and what we do as a team. So it's great. Just really blessed. We're really blessed. Cool.
So that's a really fascinating story for me, to be able to hear it from Nikki, who was there and had the experience herself. Personally, I think Pink and Darien experiences are amazing evidence that we can exist in a non-physical form, or I should say, after we die and appear to people, in our earthly form. I don't know what that means. I think it's pretty fascinating, and certainly something to think about. I just wanted to briefly touch on this. I won't go through it all, but in Buddhism, where are we? In Buddhism, they talk about the stages of dissolution when we die, there are different things there. Like here it says about we have a mental image of a bluish appearance, as in a mirage. We're not conscious. We no longer remember things, but we can have mental images like fireflies and burning sparks with puffs of smokes. The mental state is like a sputtering lamp that is about to go out, disintegration of consciousness. The mental state dawns with a red-orange appearance. I don't know. These are long time Buddhist understandings of death. We have the great empty, where everything seems black in appearance but intensely alive, and then we awaken to the clear light of death, and we enter the bardo of death, and here we meet figures. So the Buddhists have an understanding that we go on after we physically die. So I think life and death are journeys in consciousness. I think it's consciousness that survives in some form, even if we don't understand it yet, but I think we will in years to come. And so I think, in summing up, I could say that death is being reassessed. The point of death, when we actually die, is being reassessed by scientists who are saying things now like, the physical body can be dead, but the brain can be aware that you're actually dead. And that can go on for some time until the full process of death finishes. Death is far too clinical in the Western world. I think it's very important for us to be around our loved ones when we die, not in a hospital setting if we can help it, but sometimes these things happen. But understand, and that when the dying is saying things like, "I can see so-and-so over there, can you see them?" Well, the important thing is to support that and say, "Oh, I can't see them, but I know you can." Those sorts of things. I think generally Westerners are unprepared for death and dying. We have no idea. The Egyptians had a greater and far greater understanding about the process of death and what comes after it than many cultures. I think we need to discuss death more openly with the death cafes like Kirsty runs, and we have them here too. And I think we need to celebrate death as a new phase of our existence. That the more my understanding of the death, dying, and the afterlife now compared to 30 years ago is so much broader and vast than what I understood then. I really didn't have a proper, a comprehensive, and I still don't, of course, but what I understand now is far more comprehensive than I did years ago. And I think the more you look into death and learn about it from the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual understanding, the less fear people have around the dying process. And so I think in the Western world, we need to create new rituals. I mean, when we're starting to do that, and I did it too when my husband died. I had a celebration of life, and I remember a friend of ours came out of the service, and he said, "That's the first time I've ever been to a funeral," and I felt inspired. I walked out feeling inspired, because I'd asked people not to wear black, to everyone to wear white or a very light color, and we had my husband was very much into cosmology and a scientist, and so Barry helped me put together this presentation, which was really quite philosophical and would have reflected his own thoughts and feelings about living and dying and our existence in the universe. And I think we need to create these new types of rituals around dying in the Western world. So that's it for me for now. And if anyone wants to make any comments or questions, etc., feel free to do so if you're still awake.
Thank you, Sheryl. Oh, still awake. I don't know about anybody else, but I now have 100 questions flying around in my head. That was so incredibly interesting. I know that other people would have got loads out of that too. You are welcome to put your questions in. You can put them into the chat box. There's a raise hand function at the bottom of your screen under reactions, I believe. Or you can just wave your hand here if you have some questions. But Sheryl, thank you so much. Incredibly interesting. There were so many times where I could really resonate with what you were telling us. I love how you broke it down as well, pre-death, the death experience, and then after death, and incorporating so many stories, case studies, research that you've done. There were a couple of times when I was just covered in goosebumps going, oh, wow, this is amazing. So yes, I could talk for quite some time and take over, but that's not the point of this call. So if you have a question, I'm going to pop us all onto the gallery view so we can mostly all see each other. There might be a couple of pages of us here. Look at all these beautiful faces I can see. Wonderful. So if you have a question or you have something that you wish to discuss, give me a wave, pop it in the chat. You're welcome to come off mute. We're going to open up for more of a group discussion. If you go quiet on me, that's okay, because like I say, I can always ask questions. I'm going to give you the first choice though. If you have a question, let us know.
What?
It is going quiet. Look at that. I know, I can't believe it either, Paul. It's amazing. Okay, well, I'm going to break the ice. I'm going to jump on in there. I was frantically writing notes, actually, Sheryl. Just interesting. When you talked about shared death experiences, I interviewed somebody on the Let's Talk Near Death podcast who had had a shared death experience. Exactly what you talked about. They were beside the bedside of the person dying. The point of death came. They were very, very sick, and both of them rose up, and I was going, is this the same story? But I don't actually think it was. They both rose up, and she was able to watch him go off into, she saw what he saw, but then she remembers coming back into her body. It was very much a shared experience. And so when we hear about the research with near-death experiences and people are saying it's the brain shutting down, the tunnel is, the surgical lights, and it's the brain shutting down, like the old TVs when they shut down, they went down to the little dot. Do you remember that? I'm sure you all do.
Yes, I do.
So everything's shutting down, and they're talking, that's why they see the tunnel, that's the bright white light. If you have somebody who's sitting next to somebody who is not sick in the slightest, but they're going through that process with a loved one or a friend or someone there in that situation with them, and they leave their body and have the shared death experience, their brain's not shutting down. They're not seeing surgical lights. They're not having, they're not ill in any way. And so how do you explain that? well, you can't really, can you? So that's part of the fun of the research, is that you can't explain so many of these things.
Yeah.
You talked also the near-Darien experiences. These fascinate me because I have heard of so many experiences, and I've had experiences before where I thought, oh, afterwards, well, did I just interact with an angel? Was that some out of this world experience? Because it doesn't quite connect. And then I've heard of people as well. One particular story stands out, that the phone rang and it was this lady, her father had died and he was on the phone, and she was going, but you can't be because you're dead.
Yes.
And then she was sort of denying it. I don't know the full story. I've heard this second or third hand, so I don't know the full story, whether she refused to pick up the phone, it kept ringing or anything like that. But then the doorbell went, and sure enough, opened the door, and there was this person, this father, in full, what you would think was flesh and blood. And so I've heard of so many of these stories. It's so interesting to me.
Yeah.
Right.
I was just going to say, just on that point about telephone communications from the dead. I've actually had 2 cases like that reported to me. One was from actually a cleaner I had many years ago, and her sister, her brother had died, and her sister-in-law had received a phone call from her dead brother, or the sister-in-law's husband. And there was no one on the other end, but it was his number. And she kept saying, hello. She said, hello, Michael, like this, because it was his name came up on the phone, but there was no one there. And there was another one where a young woman who was coming to our group, she would get text messages from her deceased brother. And they were always on his birthday.
Oh, wow.
Bizarre, absolutely bizarre.
It totally is. I've got a very, very close friend, and her husband, he died in an accident. And he had said to her that morning, when you were talking about how people potentially see their death before it happens, they know about it. We suspect that he may have known about this. He'd sorted out everything, the life insurance, got the will up to date. He was just acting a little bit different. But you pass it off. It's not till the event happens and you look back and you go, oh, they must have known. Anyway, he said, I'll phone you after my crash. And she just said, no, you're not having a crash. Do not. Anyway, he crashed. He died. The phone, they're downstairs in the hospital morgue. There's no cell phone reception. There's nothing. And her phone rings. She can't communicate. She can't answer it. She's answering it, but there's no one there. Not even possible that it could ring. And that's when you go, this is one of my closest friends. I know that this is real. I know that this isn't one of those passed on stories like my previous one. So these experiences happen all the time. It's just so interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah. There are, sorry, Tim, go on.
Sheryl, I wondered if you could just speak a bit more to the sleep-death connection. Is my understanding, and I've just written a little bit about this, is that during the sleep process, there's a place, let's call it in heaven, that we can go to with the connection of love to another, that's called the abode of reunion. So when we sleep, the conscious mind obviously shuts down, but it enables us to travel, if you will, to this other side and be consulted with loved ones or somebody that's got a message for us. That's my understanding of it, and I find it quite profound. So I wonder if, and I noticed you had a couple of slides on that, which I thought was really cool. So yeah, are there any more experiences that you could kind of share about that facility?
I have a friend who, there's the phenomenon of mutual dreaming as well, like with the living. So why can't we have that with the dead? The phenomenon of mutual dreaming is where two people, often people who live in the same house, but not always, where they will have dreams and they will meet each other in the dream. And I can't see why that couldn't happen with people who are with, deceased loved ones too. I'm just trying to think of some other cases like that that I'm aware of. I can't think of any yet.
Yeah, it's kind of, it might sort of relate it back to personal experience, where if often we've got problems or issues or challenges in life, and that are very difficult for us to solve consciously. When we sleep, somehow when we wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh, I've got it,
Yeah.
To me, that describes that somebody or, some connection there is telling us what the solution or answer is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's been cases like that with scientists having breakthroughs, during their dreams. But they've had this sort of focused attention on a problem solving, and then they go to sleep and they have the aha moment in their dream, that sort of thing. And then they wake up and go, that's it, eureka, or but I think Rosemary Ellen Guiley wrote a good book about that, if you can get your hands on it. Rosemary Ellen, E-L-L-E-N, Guiley, G-U-I-L-E-Y. And I think it was about dream connections, put dreams in it anyway. She wrote about 40 books before she died. She only died last year, I think it was, unfortunately. She's a great paranormal researcher. And the other thing, that's right. In her book, I remember that there were information was passed on from the dead through dreams, through the living people's dreams. That's right. Cases like things that are lost and they're very important to find, or wills that have been hidden, that sort of thing. That's right. It's coming back to me now, Stephen, where it's really important for the family to know where someone has hidden their will for some strange reason. And why they would do that, I don't know. But anyway, and one case was where it was found behind the deceased loved one came to the person in a dream, told them it was behind a picture that was hanging on the wall behind the picture frame, and they found it, and there it was.
There you go.
Yeah. So that's pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
There was sorry to dominate the conversation here, but there's another book that might be of interest to you. And the author is Robert J. Lees, L-E-E-S. He wrote a sequel of 3 books, the first of which was called Through the Mists. And he described that same process where, we're connected because we're still alive, where when we sleep, we go up and we meet and we learn and we talk to loved ones or whatever. But of course, we're connected. The link is not broken. But his book was, the way he wrote it was he described, he was sitting in his office, and it's back in the early 1900s, sitting in his office, and the spirit actually came down and sat in a chair in his office and described what it was like in heaven and took him through heaven and many of its levels and tiers. So all he did was take dictation. Wonderful book of, I guess it's not a near-death experience, but actually what happens in the heavenly realms.
Yeah.
So,
amazing.
So I better shut up now and let other people.
That's all right.
Fine, Stephen. It's so interesting. Tim, did you have a question? You're on mute at the moment.
Is that better?
That's way better.
I was just wondering if anyone's familiar with the term the collective consciousness, which I've seen information on recently. And the general idea is that all consciousness in all life, for humans or anybody, basically extended right out to the universe, I guess, and probably animal life, but everything that's alive that comes from, however we feel we are ultimately, is connected. And so that kind of explains these things, like we can access it via dreams, and we can access other helpers who are, if we talk about the angel helpers who we sometimes experience, you can view them as just advanced people, like the same as us, but they're more advanced in their knowledge of maybe the collective consciousness in the universe. So that would probably explain how often we get this bit of a help, whether it's in a dream or I'm just sort of teeing this all together, sort of But the collective consciousness is wonderful reality of knowledge from all in the past and all in the future. And that kind of explains, we're thinking about these time issues where we get information from the future. The insight that I'm going to pass on, have an accident, in a week or so, it would come maybe from that collective consciousness, just because I've somehow maybe had a bit of help. That's what I'm thinking. Maybe there are times when a helper's come and say, well, Tim, I'm going to give you this insight in this experience. So I've had a near death myself. So it totally changed my perception, and it left me sort of struggling to try and explain this, as Sheryl knows fairly well. I trying to put this into words. So when I find information and hear, wonderful ideas from everybody, it's just really helpful to try and connect the dots. So, so the collective consciousness idea, I thought, anyone have any ideas on that or feelings about it?
I read up on it. I have read up on it, but I've refined it down to the collective consciousness for animals, but not for humans. I couldn't follow through with the collective consciousness for humans. We are each of us, to my understanding and my life of paranormal stuff, we're all individual consciousness. Where we maybe sit within that, I don't know.
You might like to look up, and Dr. Google will help here with it, just look up Akashic records.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe the same words.
Yes, it's the same sort of consciousness, Akashic records. So these things, as I very limited understanding, but it's the knowledge of all that has been and all that will be. And it's like a big library, so you can go in and pick out the book you need and read up about it. But if you just Google Akashic records, you get a whole lot of information on how it works, what it is. I think there's even courses or something on it too, and certainly books.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do different readings and stuff. I do Akashic readings for people. So yeah, exactly what Stephen's just said. It's a collection of everything, every moment, every thought, every action, past, current, and future. And it spans across multiple lifetimes, multiple everything. The collective consciousness I find very interesting, because I've spoken to a lot of people who, in experiences, whether that's spiritually transformative experiences or near-death experiences, or probably even in these shared death experiences that we've touched on, where they say, I became everything. I was the tree. I was the ground the tree was in. I was the water and the roots of the tree, but I was the human. I was the grass. I was everything. And I've talked a lot to people about, they talk about how we're lights, kind of like we have little lights. We light up all of the earth, and we're all one power source. We're all connected, just like a fault. If there's a fuse that goes, it blocks out the lights, but these are all connected, and we all somehow just light up because we're connected. So I think that steps into that area as well, but it's a very interesting conversation piece. I really, really like that, Tim.
And I like
go on forever with it.
Forever.
Yes, you can. It's
wonderful.
It's worth meditating and sharing and debating it. It's because we get insights. Another little thing that popped into my mind is the telepathy. And if you have telepathy, is more than just the words being spoken. It's those ideas. And as you said, that I struggle to explain what I felt like when I died, but it was the most amazing experience. You just don't have the words.
Yeah.
But fear disappears, which is wonderful. So the mind and all those worries just are not there. And the light,
Sorry.
Wow.
Can everyone hear me? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you, Alex.
I just wanted to hear, sorry, Tim, can you tell us, you might have already explained to this group already, but can you explain a bit more in more detail your near-death experience, just out of interest?
I had an infection which nearly killed me in my legs. And I'm now a bilateral amputee. I've got 2 prosthetic legs, so
right.
I'm a double pirate
I love it.
You just need the double eye patch now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I tried
And a
that.
parrot.
Yeah. Got a black eye. Yeah, 2 parrots. You got to laugh, eh? Anyway, so yeah, and I collapsed on the floor. My son found me and took me. This is 2014, and yeah, I nearly died. And according to my heart guy, surgeon said it was multiple times. But for me, it was like just going on a holiday, and I initially had these funny memories. Sheryl was talking something about how you get these. How did you explain it? You have a memory which isn't quite accurate, sort of like covers thing. I could call it a screen memory. So I've seen that word used where you have a screen, but it's only a temporary thing. And then later on, it was after I'd spent quite a bit of time exploring and going to meetings, with Sheryl and in the groups and exploring ideas. One day I had this sudden revelation of through the top of my, the head chakra, I guess, a memory of the whole experience. It just came so clearly. And
So you didn't. So the memory of the experience came later on. Is that how it was? Or?
Yes, but I was aware. I had this screen memory of like being of all places in Adelaide, in like a hospital hotel place, and that's all I remembered. So, but I knew there was more, but I'd sort of had this block, and when what I'd actually done is I actually met a group of 6 individuals, and they were all light beings, and for me, I've had sort of interactions right from my young years with ETs, to use the so I assume some of them were ETs, and just advanced people and all very benevolent. And we shared a huge amount of information telepathically, but I can't remember it. It was just a massive communication and I've since been exploring and researching and filling in a lot of those gaps. That it's kind of like at that time they said, well, when you go back, I want you to go and find all this stuff, and you won't always remember it. And I remember little bits, and so that it's getting easy for me to explain it. Does that cover it very well? But there's so much involved.
That's interesting. Yeah.
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 Because
I just wanted to give you for you to give us a brief idea of what you meant when you said that, because I was just interested.
Is that covered all right? I'm sorry.
No, that's good. Yeah. Great.
Because it's sort of, see, this is the other thing with the time. It's like time's compressed and so much information and experience is condensed into a short amount of time, and you come back sort of confused. And I think that's why the screen memory is there, to actually block some of it away. So it just opens, like the screen opens up a little bit and you get a bit of an insight. Oh, okay. And then later on something else comes and it all kind of fits together. So yeah. Yeah. Anyone else had? Yeah.
I do struggle with the collective consciousness, I must admit, I honestly admit, because I did go into it a long time ago after I'd had my NDE, but with a collective, we are everything that ever was. We're the tree, we're the sofa over there. We are everything and part of everything. And of course, that's we're also stardust, things like that. But my mediumship, when a consciousness comes through, it's an individual consciousness. When somebody comes through, it gives me a kind of evidential medium, more or less. I'm not grand at it, but people have relied on my readings to help them, and it's always been an individual consciousness. And when I had my own NDE, I had a guide, and I did speak to the guide, and I said, well, this is it, we're everything over. He said, yeah, you're the wall, you're the ceilings, but you're yourself, and there'll never be another one like you, another person. Even identical twins, they're not the same inherently, in mentally. And I've seen the collective consciousness for animals. I've actually, I got a surprise last year and had a couple of animals actually come through. But they were animals that had a very individual style. Their owners had made them into being very individual animals. You know, they just started off being a cat, and they became a very pampered cat. You know, things like that. And this is why I have the struggle, because I could see it for a whole mass of ants nest, you know, that I just drowned last week. And say, oh, they're the collective consciousness of ants. So that's okay. I can drown them.
Yeah, it gets hard, doesn't it?
I had a good
But
life.
somebody else can speak.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that, Karen. Very, very interesting. Animals. It's interesting, Sheryl, how much the animals came up when you're talking about the, gosh, I can't even read my writing down here. The harbingers, is that right? They were birds, lots and lots of birds there. And then you're talking about, I think it was when you're talking about the psychopomps as well. They were animal coming through as wolves and features like that. And I thought, oh, there's lots of animal appearances. It's probably the best word for it.
Yeah, and that's in many cultures, those sorts of things. But they can be humanoids as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so interesting. Paul, I see that hand where you can, we'll make this the last one. I think probably what we need to do is actually bring everybody back just for a general discussion, because your presentation, Sheryl, was outstanding, absolutely interesting.
Oh, thank you. I've just scratched the surface, really.
I know, that's the thing. And the time is so limited, isn't it? Our 90 minutes just goes so quickly. So I think probably what we'll do is revisit having a group discussion around all of these topics just on its own without having a presentation, so we can really get into the discussion piece.
It'd be nice.
Idea.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll let you know about that. But Paul, what is your question or your comment?
Look, not so much a question, just a comment. Like with this, the collective consciousness, like this thing of how you think of someone and then they call you up. You know, that's that really obvious sort of thing. So you've got to be connected in some way. So moving on from that. And the other thing is, I think like this little group's the only one I know, but it appears to me everyone's trying to get an agreement about what's going on. You know, is someone has, you know, some animal appears, or that, you know, some creature with wings and a big head and big eyes. It could well be that there is just a huge variety of options, and that there is not one way. Because when you look around all the sort of people you see, you think, that person's life has nothing to do with how I see life. So that's that. But the other thing is, just quickly, is the few people I know who are close to death, people who have been, you know, they got cancer in a few months, this sort of thing, there is a total reluctance to actually have a conversation about the dying experience. It is just, the people I know, it's just totally negative. And it's a really risky thing to bring it up, you know, because I'll try to go, well, look, I'm going to die, so I want to be positive about this, and you know, see the good side of it. But I find, I'm sure you people are probably like this. That's why we're part of this group. But yeah, I am surprised that in general in the populace that we're very negative about this dying thing, you know. So hey.
I think that's normal, because we're biologically wired not to want to die.
That's right.
We're supposed to survive and so that humanity goes on. But yeah, I absolutely agree, and that's what I was saying, that there's this conspiracy of silence around death in the Western world, and we really need to change that, to start having these dialogues, and that can only come from more understanding, and with more understanding comes less fear. And I've got a cousin who's unwell at the moment. She's has emphysema. So if anyone smokes, stop smoking. And she's only 63, and she's now got cancer in her lungs as well. So, and she's extremely frightened of dying, extremely. You know, she keeps saying, I'd love to come to your afterlife group. And then she doesn't turn up. I'm coming, but then she doesn't. She's told me she's just so frightened of it, but only because she hasn't educated herself about it.
Which is so great now, isn't it? Like, say, YouTube or what we're doing here. The information's out there, and you can actually go and have a look yourself, for sure.
Yeah, and just on that point, we do have an Afterlife Discussions YouTube channel. So if you go there, I think there's about 50 odd videos there. And there's some on Afterlife Discussions 2 YouTube channel, because for some reason the Google account got disconnected and we had to start another one. But and I have done a presentation here, which Tim, you might have forgotten. I think you were there, but about Akashic records and all sorts of different things. Lots of things that I was talking about here. I've taken one subject and go into it in depth, so you can have a scroll through there and see what you can find. But that's Afterlife Discussions YouTube channel, and we've also got a Facebook page, Afterlife Discussions, if you're on there as well.
Oh, fabulous. Cheryl, perhaps do you want to go in once we've got this video up, posted into that channel? Do you want to just leave a comment with the links to your channels and to your Facebook pages? Feel free to on the Facebook page as well. If you're not part of the Facebook group, entirely up to you, but we do have an Irons Down Under Facebook group as well, where we post links to things and you get all of the reminders about the events. So yeah, feel free to do that, Cheryl.
Yeah, or I can send it to you and you can put it in with the post on YouTube too. Either way.
Yeah, we can work it out. Either way, we'll get that information out there. Wow, fabulous. My heart is full because I just feel like there's so much. Sheryl, you did an amazing job. It's not always easy to present on Zoom when we're all on mute. And I felt for you, because that's something that's very real. We've got the background noise and all the distraction if we're not on mute, but when we're on mute, you're getting no interaction from us. So it's not always easy to jump on and share such an amazing presentation and feeling like you're talking just out of screen, that nobody's there. So yeah.
Can I just apologize? Could I just apologize?
Sure, what's that for, Karen?
I've been back and forth, people have sent me up and down. I've just got the most horrendously naughty cat this afternoon.
Oh, your cat.
It's
fine, Karen.
I'm trying
Life
to
happens.
concentrate on what's happening here.
Oh, it's absolutely fine. Life happens. And if you need to get up and out, and you know, that's how it is. We just love that people show up. We are trying very hard to just host these conversations. We want to create a safe space to have these discussions. So you're all wonderful. Sheryl, can we just give her a clap? Let's give her a clap.
Thanks, Sheryl.
It's not very loud, is it? But honestly, that was just amazing, Sheryl. I'm going to stop recording now. I'm going to click stop on that.